All right, everybody. Thanks for coming to another episode of Mixed Metal Arts Chats. Today, we're going to talk about Star Trek, and we're all here at Tanagra. And we're going to go ahead and do a little intro for everybody. I'm just going to go based on what I have here up on my screen. So go ahead first, Hunter.
Hey everybody, my name is Hunter Motz, and I'm a huge Star Trek fan. At some point, I knew the difference between a Trekkie and a Trekker. One is that you have some balance to your life, and the other is that you have no balance to your life. I'm not sure which one I am. But yeah, I love Star Trek. Favorite series is definitely The Next Generation, although I definitely hear Dustin on... No, I definitely hear Dustin on the value of Deep Space Nine. That would probably be my number 2.
All right. I'll let you slide on that one. All right, Isaiah, go ahead and introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Isaiah. I am not a huge Trekkie, but when I was a much younger man, I watched a lot of Star Trek Voyager because I didn't have cable, and it was the only thing on after 10 that wasn't the news. So I watched a lot of that. It's fun.
Great. So at least we have somebody here that can talk about Voyager at length. All right. Loudon, go ahead and introduce yourself.
Hello. Yeah, I'm also a big Trekkie, but pretty much that just means that I watch The Next Generation. I pretty much don't want to even watch anything else because I don't believe that it could be nearly as good. And make it so. That's it.
I know. Maybe it's my day to convince everybody otherwise. All right, Sean, go ahead and introduce yourself.
My name is Sean. I'm sort of a Trekkie. I've seen everything except for that CBS Online one. Like every episode of everything. I like DS9 the best. I really, with a passion, hate the original series, and I hate every single Star Trek movie that's ever been made, especially the whale one, which just brings forth such a profound rage in me whenever I see it on TV that I can't even be in a room. And I think that's about it.
All right, great. Well, I don't have a lot of experience with the original. If we're going to go chronological, does anybody have anything to say about the original series?
William Shatner's wonderful.
It's terrible from beginning to end.
And he's Canadian.
Yes.
I have to say, like, there are some people who are super diehard fans of the old series. I agree with Sean. I think it sucks.
Well, it's probably culturally outside of our kind of worldview, but you got to admit there were some great moments, like the first televised interracial kiss, I believe.
Yeah, and I think also a lot of the things that they did in the later series, they were clearly working out, like how to use sci-fi to do social commentary, which obviously is a lot of what sci-fi does. But there's that, whatever that episode is with the some people have half of their faces black on the left, and some of them have half their faces white on the right, and then some people are the other way around, and then those two groups hate each other. There are some landmark episodes for sure, but I just think that it's kind of like saying that insert musical analogy here of whatever the proto band was of the actual good band. Like, yeah, the seeds are there, but it doesn't mean that it's actually good.
Yeah, I do. I haven't watched the original extensively, but whatever clips I see, it just seems extremely campy. I don't know if anyone agrees with that assessment, but one of the only ones I kind of watched just because of the interest in it. I believe there was an episode where they go back to like the 1920s and they're like all gangsters and like doing their whole. I guess it's a running theme, right? Because I think in all the series they do an episode where they go back to the 1920s, like in the holodeck or whatever form it is. Because I know when doesn't Picard like have a Tommy gun and just start spraying a holodeck bar or something like that?
That's very dramatic.
Yes, he does. I think you're right though. I think every single series they've gone back to the 20s.
Yeah, so I'm not super well versed on the old one. It's super goofy for me. It's probably something that my mom likes because she probably grew up with that. But what always annoyed me is just like that stupid sound on the bridge. It would just like annoy the hell out of me. I don't know if you guys know what I mean. It's just that
Wait, in the
weird.
original one or
Yeah, in the original.
Okay, because I find the one on Next Generation extremely soothing, and it's kind of like I'm thinking about having like a white noise generator to play it because it's so cool, and I've actually had a problem like I'm in labs sometimes, and there's like pumps and all this, and it just knocks me out. Like I just fall asleep, and yeah, if there's a turbo pump going on somewhere, I shouldn't drive with it.
Man, maybe I need to get a recording of that. I have a pretty hard time getting to sleep. All right, so I guess I know it seems that we're kind of completely glossing over the original. And sorry, older fellas out there, we don't like it that much.
All two people who are watching.
Yeah, but watch as both of those people are huge fans of the original series and are
Hi,
like,
Mom.
One of them has Spock ears on. Guaranteed.
exactly. What a travesty! They didn't even fully engage with the original series.
All right, so I guess we could move on to everyone's beloved favorite, TNG, the Next
DS9?
Generation.
Oh,
Well, DS9 is mine,
all
but
right.
it's
Cool.
like everybody's is TNG, it seems.
Yes,
Yeah.
The Next Generation is a Star Trek. I like the Next Generation because it has mainly because it has LeVar Burton in it. That's pretty much the only reason why I like it.
You don't like Worf?
Not really. Not really.
The funny thing about Worf is he's like the most useless security officer ever. Like, as soon as they encounter somebody powerful, Worf's like the first person to get beat up. And then he gets put out of commission. So he's like, the funny thing about DS9 is he actually gets like his recognition as being like a powerful warrior. But in TNG, he's just like the first roadblock that a bad guy gets rid of as soon as he boards the ship.
Well, that's a storytelling problem because the whole problem is with the Next Generation is very much the monster of the week, right? It's the alien of the week. So they just have like a constant series of aliens that are coming through. And so they never get to really develop the dynamic of that strength. So it's just every single week, like somebody comes in and is like, oh my God, they're stronger than Worf. But you've never gotten to see Worf beat the shit out of a bunch of people. Whereas I feel like one of the things that DS9 does really get right is having the Dominion and the Jem'Hadar. So there's an ongoing protagonist that you can see, Worf sometimes beats them. Sometimes they beat Worf. But there's at least some sort of, real competition there.
Yeah, that's the reason. Sorry, I was going to say that's the reason why I like DS9 better. It's the episodic nature of the TNG just kind of killed it. There was no carryover or very little from even episode to episode or year to year. It was just very contained in each episode. And DS9, there were consequences far down the line to decisions they were making in the current episode. And it was just really well done, I thought.
Yeah, definitely the plot structure of DS9 is totally different. It's just that Monster of the Week, the great thing about it is you can just select any random episode and you don't really need any backstory to understand what's going on. DS9, you picked the wrong episode, and you have no idea what the hell's going on, because there's so many things that like it's just a long arcing plot. They do have the Monster of the Week or Alien of the Week episodes, but there is an overarching plot to the whole series.
Yeah, and that's definitely DS9's strength, and that is also what Voyager tried to do much more. But it's also part of the reason why some of the strongest episodes from The Next Generation are the Borg episodes, because the Borg become a recurring force that can actually be developed.
And that's
Yeah, the Borg, the Romulans, like anytime they encounter like one of the repeated antagonists, there's always a little bit of building on that conflict in each of their encounters.
Yeah, and that's why I liked Voyager, is that, you know, it had a lot of continuity with the conflict with the Borg. Like it was always an episode where they were encountering the Borg or fighting the Borg directly, or the Borg was, you know, subverting the crew in some way, shape, or form. And that's why, like, the storyline with 7 of 9 was really, you know, what's the word I'm looking for? It was really it drew you in. So I'm sure Deep Space Nine draws you in the same way because of the serialized storytelling.
Yeah, Deep Space Nine is like watching Dragon Ball Z. You want to see what the next episode is, because there's actual cliffhangers and stuff. So,
is there an announcer that goes next time on Deep Space Nine?
You know what? There might have been when it was on network, but I have no idea. You know what? Actually, yes, but there's like some episodes that are in chunks, so there'll be like I think the longest is like a 9-parter. But at the end of like the parters, I think they do announce like next on, et cetera, et cetera.
And I think this actually points out something that I think is really important about Star Trek is that people always talk about series being the best, but I think it's actually characters that we love. Like Geordi LaForge is awesome. I really like Data. I would agree on Deep Space Nine Worf. I also thought Jadzia Dax was always an awesome character. And then 7 of 9 is one of the greatest characters, I mean, maybe ever. And I really liked actually the Doc from the holographic Doctor from Voyager. And then there are just a lot of characters that kind of suck in all of the series. Janeway kind of sucked. Chakotay kind of sucked. Neelix was a bit stupid. You know, Wesley Crusher is notoriously like just a horrible fucking character. And yeah, I mean, there are plenty of shitty characters. Oh, and then I know that Dustin loves what's his face, the Kardashian Taylor. Yeah, Garrick is awesome. So yeah,
Garrick is awesome. Whoever that actor is awesome. The character was great. The actor was great.
Yeah, it's like this like unassuming Taylor who's who's an assassin by night. It's kind of a really good and interesting character, and he plays like a large role in one of my favorite episodes. But yeah, like if we talk about TNG, like specifically, there were some bad characters too, right? Like Whoopi Goldberg. And 10 Forward, what was her name?
I don't even remember off the top.
She was like the bartender. Guyan, there you go.
Guyan. I actually kind of loved Guyan.
Yeah, I liked her too.
Oh, and also, what's his face? Q. Q was a fucking awesome character from Next Generation.
Yeah, and guess what? Cisco punched him in the face. So
Cisco wins.
Yeah, basically.
Q let him punch him in the face. Q wouldn't. Yeah.
Well, Q didn't think he was gonna punch him in the face, so He's like, oh, he's well, actually, was he a captain? No, he was just a commander then. So he's like, these Starfleet characters don't do anything. So he wasn't expecting to get punched.
This
But
points up actually something that's really interesting because, like, it kind of, this actually reminds me of the James Bond series, where they sort of alternated between camp and badass. Like, Roger Moore, Sean Connery was badass. Roger Moore, like, they tried to, like, make it camp and fun. And then with Timothy Dalton and then Pierce Brosnan and Daniel Craig, they tried to go back towards badass. And I think it's the same thing with Star Trek. They kind of can't make up their mind. Wait, is the fun of this that it's camp, or is the fun of this that it's badass? And Deep Space Nine is definitely the most badass of the Star Trek franchises.
yeah, but whenever a Q shows up, it does get a bit campy.
Yeah, and it does work. Like the camp of Q is actually the most effective campiness probably on the entire show.
Yeah, and then there's that other DS9 episode where they go back in time to they go back in time and they're in an episode of the original series. So they went into Triple Trouble. And it's funny because Worf was with them and they're trying to ask Worf to explain why the Klingons look so different.
We don't talk about that.
Yeah. But DS9 definitely did not have that much camp in it, like as compared to, maybe some of the sillier episodes in TNG. Like, I know in the first season there's this episode, I think towards the end of the season, where everybody just becomes like hedonists. So I think Data screws around with the head of security. I forget what her name was. But she was only on that one. Yeah, she gets killed off, right?
Tasha Yar?
Tasha Yar.
Tasha Yar, there you go. But yeah, there's this episode where everyone's just like going nuts and like having affairs with each other. It's like some type of I don't remember the exact details of the episode, but everyone's personality gets changed and everyone's like not doing their jobs and they're just kind of screwing off. But yeah, I don't know. My favorite character from TNG would have to be Data, as he had like some of the silliest moments. Like, and he had like some really sad moments, and it's weird because he can't really express emotion. So, one of the episodes was when he created a daughter for himself, or a child, like his own child, and then there was something wrong with the positronic brain of his child, like it couldn't sustain basically the personality of the child. And it was interesting to see him trying to attempt to go through some type of grieving process, but since he's absent of emotions, it just wasn't there for him. And it was like a really odd and interesting thing to see with that. And anytime he has like a relationship with somebody, like I know there's this one where he dates a crew member, and it's like the most awkward episode I've ever seen in my life. But yeah, I always loved Data a lot. His relationship with his creator, and his brother, I guess, is just like an evil version of him. But I always liked his adventures, and I thought Data was a pretty good actor. Brett Spiner, he did a pretty good job with that character, I think.
But again, there is a real character arc there and a progression, and there is something that he's up against. I mean, the stakes are pretty damn clear for him.
Yeah, his evil brother. I think his brother killed his dad, right?
Yeah, Lore killed. Spoiler alert: Lore killed Dr. Dr. Noonien Sung.
Yeah, yeah. It was like Data and some weird makeup, or Brett Spiner and some weird makeup. But yeah, that I thought that whole character arc was interesting, and you know, Geordi was cool. He was the resident egghead. But yeah, I thought Data was specifically a scene stealer, so that's just my opinion.
Yeah, it kind of is like that. Like T on the YouTube chats is talking like there was that episode where he played all three, and that seemed a bit, you know, whenever I saw that, like where he played, you know, Data, Lore, and Dr. Sung, and to me it was like I almost got the feeling like, oh, okay, Brett Spiner is trying to show off his acting ability, and it kind of got in the way, and it's just like, okay, he wants to get hired later on for other acting jobs because he's like he can play all three, and he like literally steals the whole show. So I don't know, that was my feeling, and some episodes are like that.
But yeah, there was an episode, I think, on our list, which is The Inner Light, that I also enjoyed. It also made me realize that Patrick Stewart has an odd shaped head. But I think Hunter recommended this episode. Did you want to talk about it a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, The Inner Light is, I think a lot of people think it's one of the best episodes ever. And I remember watching it even as a kid and just being really struck by it, not totally understanding why. And part of it is that what makes it stand out is that unlike, you know, they have, like, what I always think is interesting is in movies or TV shows, when they try and achieve like this ultimately beautiful piece of music, it usually fucking sucks. But here, the piece of music is actually really, really good. And so what happens is that Picard is on the bridge and they found some probe just floating in space and they don't know what it is. And then all of a sudden the probe, like, you know, some beam comes out of it and it just hits Picard in the head. And then he basically descends into some sort of catatonic state. And then Picard proceeds to live out this whole lifestyle, this whole life on an alien planet. And yes, as Sean is indicating, part of it is that he learns this flute and learns how to play this piece of music. Do you actually know how to play the piece of music?
I do not, unfortunately.
That would be a really dope interlude.
That is literally why this flute is here, though.
It's because of The Inner Light?
Yeah.
Well, do you want to pick up from where I left off?
No, you'll do a far better job.
But yeah, so he learns this piece of music, and basically by the end of his life on this alien planet, they basically realize that the sun is going to go supernova and they're all going to die and their civilization is going to be wiped out. And so they want to find some way to preserve their culture. And so this is what they come up with. And when they bring the satellite on board, they find this flute in there. So they've managed to get, you know, their favorite piece of music and sort of the experience of their life and their culture preserved through the mind of Picard. And this is one of those things that actually becomes a bit of a runner through the show. In later episodes, Picard plays this piece of music. But I always thought it was a fascinating idea of, you know, if your culture is going to be destroyed, what is the best way to preserve it?
Yeah, that was I would say that experience that character Picard had was probably the most insane experience that any other character has had, because he basically lived almost an entire lifetime. He raised I guess a virtual family. You know, he had a virtual wife. And he lived a life that was so different than, you know, what he had as a captain on a starship. And I thought I would have liked to see that, like what happened to him and his molding and that experience play out more outside of him just playing a flute occasionally. But yeah, that was a really good episode.
Yeah, that was one of the most amazing episodes, and I think it is usually ranked top 5. And yeah, like that's something I guess I was jealous of is he got to live a second life, you know, and just do a whole another thing. And there's another episode that's kind of along those lines where Picard becomes a child again, and he also kind of gets to live like a second life. And he's like, oh man, this sucks, but everybody's like, no, this is really cool. You get to use all your experience, and then now you can go do other stuff. And I don't know, like it's kind of I guess with these stories, it's kind of like a lottery thing. It's like, oh well, how I wish I won the lottery because then I would do this. So you start thinking about like what I would do, what you would do in a situation like that where you can live another life or live again. You know, you're age 12 again or something like this. So I think maybe that's honestly like why it's maybe so popular. It gets people thinking like, wow, if I was 12 and I knew everything I know now, then that would be really cool.
Yeah, amazing episode for sure. Did anyone want to talk about Darmok and Jalad at Tanagra? Hunter.
I will, since no one else is going to, or were you going to, Ladon?
Yeah, I mean, I was gonna say I was thinking about it today, and I mean, I remember when I watched the episode. I think I watched it twice too. Like, you know, I was always just like struck. I'm like, well, how? Okay, so they talk in parables, and the whole thing is kind of circular. But how do they like even convey that? You know, like how do they even begin teaching that? Because with the words, you would also have to be teaching all the concepts behind it. So it's not like a singular concept. It's you basically have to learn everything that's connected. And I mean, the only way I could think of this is like if they learn the language through video or like some kind of movie or something like this, and before they would even be able to speak or understand anything, that they would be able to they would learn like this. So I was kind of thinking like the principle of this, or like the logistics of how do you teach a language that's so circular and refers to everything else as you're speaking, something like this.
I have a question regarding that. So how do you pronounce the name of the language again? Or the ethnicity of the people or the race of the people, whomever?
Darmok is a character from an epic. I don't know what the actual species is called. I can look that up.
Okay. So do they speak only, like they have no other parlance aside from these idioms and aphorisms?
Yeah, I think in the episode they pretty much what appears to speak English. Well, they don't speak English, but the translator probably picks something up and translates it back as English.
Yeah.
But they have no idea what the meaning is behind the words that they speak.
Okay. So it sounds like word salad then.
Yeah, and that's the whole thing, is they made contact with the species, and Sean just shared the name of the species, the Temerians. But the whole episode is about the fact that they're saying things that the universal translator can figure out, but that make no fucking sense. So they just keep on saying, you know, Darmok and Jalad at Tanagra, and Temba, his arms wide open, you know, Shaka, when the walls fell. And they're like, what the fuck does this mean?
Okay. And they're not like carried together by other aspects like you know, normal language.
Nope. That's
Okay.
the entirety of their language. And so you know, what they do is they arrange this experience where Picard and the captain of the Temerian ship end up trapped on this planet together and have to fight this monster.
Uh-huh.
And through this intense bonding experience, you know, they have to figure out how to communicate. And, you know, Picard basically finally figures out that what their language is, and that essentially there was some culture that had a series of epics like Darmok and Jalad at Tanagra. And it's, you know, they give the reference of the Epic of Gilgamesh, and that they're referencing everything back to this epic. The other important thing about this episode is that it features Ashley Judd in her acting debut.
Oh, interesting.
Really?
Yeah.
I don't remember that.
I remember that because we saw her, and I looked to my wife, and I was like, "Is that?" And she said, "Yeah, I think so." So yeah, you're right.
Who's Ashley Judd?
Pretty girl.
Yeah.
Wait,
Sexually
what
assaulted
character
by
was
Harvey
she?
Weinstein, I think. She was, I think, like some ensign or something like that.
I guess I
Um,
didn't catch that one.
yeah.
So
Anyway, yeah.
eventually, did you want to finish what happened on the island?
Oh, so eventually they figure out that, basically Darmok and Jalad at Tanagara were two people who, faced against a threat, had to band together against a beast. And this is, what is being paralleled here. And so Picard starts to understand what these metaphors are. And, by the end of the episode, the the Temerian captain actually dies. But fighting this beast, but it was worth it because they've made the breakthrough in communication. And
It's Captain Riker's fault too, right?
well, and most things are Captain Riker's fault. I mean, if it isn't Riker, it's Wesley Crusher. Let's be honest, who is mini Riker. But yeah, I don't remember if it was Riker's fault that the captain dies.
Yeah, because remember, Picard was going to help him out, but Riker was like, "Oh, we got to beam him out. We have a chance." So that put like the Picard kind of like in the half and half stasis, where he couldn't help out the captain and he couldn't be beamed up. So he essentially stopped him from helping the alien captain, and that pretty much spelled his demise.
Thanks, Riker. And then, yeah, and the part of the ending is that they add a new metaphor to the language, Picard and Dathan at El Adrel, which is, I think, for, essentially, Picard mourns Dathan, who sacrificed his life to open relations between their two cultures.
Okay.
And that is Darmok.
Darmok and Jalad at Tanagra. It is actually really great. And I think to Ladon's point, like, obviously there was a time when humans operated effectively without language. And, you don't need language to communicate procedural learning. And you can teach someone to hunt without saying anything, right? You just show them, you point, you adjust their body. So there's no reason why they couldn't communicate in a lot of skills. And then the question is, what is verbal language mostly for? And, what do you need it for? And a lot of it is communicating your inner emotional state or the experience that you're having or a desire for alliance or allegiance. So I think we should do the rest of this chat entirely in Temerian and see how far we get.
Not very.
So maybe it would be something like, turning a name or something into a verb. Be like, oh man, I motzed that, exam, or I hunted that girl or whatever, and then that means
get
something.
Her away by eating too much at the first date.
Yeah, pretty much.
Is that how you motz a date?
That's how you motz a date.
Isaiah and
Has that happened or what?
Facebook.
Huh?
Isaiah and Emo Wellington on Facebook.
Utter meltdowns. But it's interesting to talk about these referential aspects of language and how they work, because we have them in English, of course, but they're not as codified or standardized as they are in other languages. Like I'm sure, I don't know Arabic, but I bet that there are allusions to the Quran constantly throughout the language. But in Chinese, there's referentials with Chengyu to specific, stories, characters, etc. Like Saiwang Sherma is the old man who lost his horse, which is, the story that Hunter likes to tell all the time regarding the too soon to tell thing. And if you didn't know the story, that phrase, an old man loses his horse, makes no sense. So
Oh, that sounds exactly kind of like what was going on in this episode.
exactly, and that's why it sparked that image in my mind in the referential nature of Chinese. Like there's another one, Tongbi Dangche, which is the praying mantis uses its arms to try and stop a cart, and it's indicating don't overestimate yourself or something of that nature. It's a little bit more complicated, but if you didn't know the totality of the story, it like makes no sense to put it that way, you know. It's kind of yeah, stories inform language and language informs stories, and it's kind of like a circular referential pattern. And I don't know, I don't I haven't seen this episode, so I have no reference there. But that's one of the reasons why I like Star Trek in the abstract and whatnot, is because it kind of like is a way to look at cultures from outside the culture.
Well, and that brings up something that I've been thinking about through this whole chat that I'd love everybody's thoughts on, which is why is it that science fiction is so good at sort of cultural commentary and illuminating different aspects of human nature much better than, say, fantasy, or at least in my experience?
Well, I think it's something that's far enough removed that they can talk about certain subjects that are relevant that won't offend anybody. Like they can be certainly connected to the events of today, like things like racism. They'll certainly present it in a different way in a science fiction contest, such as what one might think about an alien race or something like that. So it's easier to break that commentary about racism than to talk about it in a contemporary sense directly.
Basically, what I see is that it breaks down my side bias, which is what Dustin was alluding to. It's removed from where you are. Like we could talk about like the Borg, for instance, right? The Borg, you must assimilate, technology gone amok, et cetera. But really, it's the collective versus the individual, and that's one of the reasons why Seven of Nine is such an interesting character to me, because it's like a detribalization in the most stark contrast of going from the Borg to Starfleet in that manner, and it would be the same, taking a Russian immigrant and putting him in America in the 1980s, or a Chinese immigrant from the People's Republic to America nowadays, because like the attitude is completely different. It's an integration that is far enough removed from contemporary times that has no real connection to where we live now. So it shows these fundamentally human aspects of life in a way that is alien, basically.
Yeah, but in the same way, it's still kind of real. You don't have like warlocks and tree spirits and like dancing unicorns or whatever, and you can be like, okay, well this is very similar to what we're doing, and that's what I really liked about Star Trek is, I mean, it's very clearly just talking about different cultures. Obviously, like aliens, they're not going to be like 5'8" tall, bipedal beings, that they're like very, very similar to us. But it's like, oh, these are the Mongolians, like the Worf and Klingons. These are like the Mongolian like warriors and everything like this, and this is this. So it's far enough that it gives you perspective, but not so far that you lose credibility. Something like this.
I feel like the differentiation that you're placing there isn't necessarily accurate. I think it's more that a science fiction narrative is more, it is referential to reality in that way, but at the same time it's kind of removed from oneself in certain aspects. Whereas a fantasy story is embedded within the mythology that already exists. typically, regardless of what the fantasy story is. Like you could take Harry Potter. Harry Potter is baked within, a certain mythological lore or general folklore to make its points. So even though it's a fantasy narrative, it's still built within that Anglo culture so deeply that it's like near inseparable. Whereas something like Star Trek is so alien from what we would think of as being American or Anglo, so it's removed completely.
But I think it's
sorry, I was just say I'm more of a fantasy nerd than anything else, and there are a lot of good fantasy books that tackle stuff like that very well, but I don't think I've ever seen it like on television. Really, it's just not a popular. Or recently, I guess it has been, but traditionally it hasn't really been a popular thing, genre for television or even movies, really.
Yeah, so like compare Game of Thrones versus Star Trek and the social commentaries therein.
Well, I think a better comparison right now would be I don't know if you guys have seen the recent Netflix movie Bright, but yeah, it's kind of like they take like the Lord of the Rings, orcs and whatever elves and all the humans, but they put it into modern times, and then they kind of go with some social commentary on that. And that I thought that was really cool. That actually should be a series. I think that shouldn't have been a movie. That should be a series.
Yeah, that was definitely good aspect. I know they were drawing upon things like Shadowrun and stuff like that, which have merged. Well, I think Bright is not really futuristic. It just seems kind of like along the same timeline that we're running. But Shadowrun is like cyberpunk with fantasy, basically, which is people with the brain implants. Plus, there's elves and orcs. But I saw that there was a lot of inspiration drawn from there, and they did tackle. They did a really good job of tackling race issues in Bright. Actually, very, very well. Did a really good job there.
What's cyberpunk?
Cyberpunk. It's usually futuristic. Doesn't have, it's near future, so it's not like Star Trek future. It's probably like 20 to 40 years out usually. There's usually androids or a lot of philosophical discussions about is AI life, things like that, or transferring consciousness to machines. There's a lot of that going on in cyberpunk.
So like
it's just
Ex Machina, maybe?
Like, have you ever heard of Neuromancer?
I've heard of it, yeah.
That's sort of like the classic, like, entry to like cyberpunk. It's a really popular book. So if you're ever interested, it's really good too. So if you're interested, pick up Neuromancer and give it a read. I mean, it's just it was described very well by Dustin, but that's kind of like the classic thing to look into.
Yeah, if you want like some super mainstream examples, I guess Blade Runner would be one. A really odd one is Mario Brothers the movie.
I love that movie. It's so bad.
Yeah, it is bad, but it's pretty much cyberpunk without too much cyber in it. But
it's amazing.
Ghost in the Shell, that's typical cyberpunk. So it's just like a lot of philosophical things about what it is to be human. That's a lot of what cyberpunk really likes to get in about philosophy wise. I guess The Matrix is kind of cyberpunky a bit.
Yeah, I would say that The Matrix is very cyberpunk.
Yeah.
Cyberpunk tends to be techno dystopian as opposed to science fiction, which is often a bit more techno utopian. Like if you look at these cyberpunk works, they tend to still have things like prostitution, drug use, you know, people being lost, you know,
Like
abuses of
Total
power.
Recall.
Yeah.
Total Recall.
Yeah, I was going to say Philip K. Dick just in general.
Yeah, 3 boobies. That's totally cyberpunk.
Yeah, but that's the techno-utopian part.
Not so much. That
definitely
place
not
was kind of a,
dystopian.
yeah, that area of the Mars was kind of a shithole though.
So
Yeah.
this brings up another thing that I was thinking about with regards to Star Trek, is that Star Trek seems to be deeply embedded within that that enlightenment ideal that anything could be understood and exploited by mankind through reason and logic, right? In the way that Starfleet as a as an existence isn't really it's not really a military body in the same way that, you know, we have military bodies today. It goes out and explores. It just, that's its purpose, is to voyage, you know.
Well, DS9 would say otherwise.
Well, yeah, I haven't seen that one, but that's isn't that
Well,
like
Voyager and TNG are very much exploration based. They don't, like, the vessels themselves aren't exclusive military vessels, but and that changes a bit in DS9.
Well, and specifically, that's a departure from the general Star Trek franchise, DS9. And they're essentially forced to confront that because they are up against an enemy that is, you know, committed to military conquest and domination. And so they have to let go of their hippy-dippy principles. I think the one thing that I would say about Isaiah's point about Star Trek and the Enlightenment is that yes, Altered Carbon is another example of cyberpunk. But the other thing that I would say is that one thing I actually really appreciate about Star Trek is that there is a real appreciation of myth, story, and emotion in a way that you don't generally find in things that sort of celebrate that Enlightenment ideal.
yeah.
Like Picard is obsessed with archaeology and obsessed with other cultures. You know, Data's whole quest is for emotion and for feeling. That's what he wants. He wants to escape that sort of Enlightenment ideal.
Is that why you identify with him so much?
Yeah, exactly. I am Data.
And then Worf in Honor Culture,
Yeah.
because he was his father was a figure that brought dishonor to his family.
Well, at least that's what we were told originally, but then we find out the truth.
Like
Mhm.
Data, I also used to praise rationality, but now try to understand the importance of emotion.
So I
Let's
think
talk
that's
about one more episode before we move to DS9. Did you want to talk about Drumhead?
Oh yeah, we could definitely talk about Drumhead. One of my all-time favorite episodes. It's basically they took the McCarthy hearings and brought it to the world of Star Trek, where basically there's an admiral who is the daughter of the admiral's, like, you know, admiral age, so 60 to 80, something like that. But her father was a famous judge, you know, very moral, very principled man. And she basically somehow gets convinced that there are Romulans that have infiltrated the Enterprise. And she basically begins a witch hunt. And it's a really, really good look at what that phenomenon is that appears in human cultures. And you know, Picard has a lot of great lines about that, you know, spreading fear in the name of righteousness. And then, you know, what's interesting as well is that Worf, for fairly obvious reasons of what his culture is focused on, gets duped by this admiral, and he thinks she's a really good person. And he says, I did not see what she was. And, you know, I think that's the reality is that, you know, if you're Worf and you respect strength and you respect, you know, defending what's yours at all costs, then somebody who is, you know, using that kind of rhetoric is going to seem like a good person to you. But in practice, you know, what Picard succeeds in revealing in the end of the episode, because eventually the witch hunt progresses so far that she accuses Picard of being in legion with the Romulans. And on the witness stand, he quotes her father back at her, who basically had said something to the effect of, you know, with the first link, the chain is forged. So as soon as you start down the road where you start abridging people's liberties in the name of, you know, security or safety, you've started down the slippery slope towards, you know, being an oppressive society. And she goes fucking nuts because she's like, how dare you quote my father? And basically the presiding admiral in charge of the whole case sort of sees this, and everybody realizes what her deal is, and they bring an end to the witch hunt. But it's a really, really good look at that climate of fear, and I think particularly relevant right now because there's a lot of witch hunts going on.
Agreed. I also like the part, like, during the last trial where her superior just gives like this befuddled look and walks out on the trial. I was like, okay, this guy knows it's a farce. But yeah, I really like that part. And then there's a part in the end, I know, where, you know, like Picard is in this pose of thought, just leaning up against the window. And I know it's funny because I was looking at the pose. I was like, okay, that's like some super actory thing that he's doing. And then, you know, that's when Worf comes up and kind of apologizes for siding with the crazy lady. All right. So DS9, what are you guys' thoughts on that series as a whole?
I think the series definitely changes pretty massively across its, like, initially they're kind of trying to do the sort of traditional Star Trek shtick, and it's a bit more campy. And then increasingly they lean into this war with the Dominion. But what I really appreciated about it was that it was the first series where they're like, hey, there are 300 other quadrants. How do we explore them?
Yeah, there's the whole wormhole aspect and all this unexplored territory. So there's a little bit of exploration in there, but there is this stationary element provided by the DS9 and just kind of a general war over territory. Before the Dominion gets involved, there's, you know, the Bajorans and the Cardassians that are the two factions that are going after each other, and Cisco's kind of caught in the middle of that, right?
You say the Kardashians?
Or the Cardassians, my bad. Yeah, the Cardassians.
Listen, if anybody wants to say that the Kardashians are a serious threat to our security and safety, I will be right there with you.
I've heard arguments about that.
Well, I know there's some photoshops online that give Kim Nina, you know, the Cardassian neck, but you got to go look those up. The thing about Cisco is they did some very deep development right in the beginning of the show of his character. He's basically, I don't know. I wouldn't say they would. He had a very traumatic opening for the series. So in the very beginning, it shows him in the middle of this battle, and the actual battle occurred in a TNG episode. So this is kind of a side story of what happened with him. So what happened is his ship was attacked. You know, lots of casualties, and his wife was killed. So he's a widower, whatever a male version is called. And he has a son to take care of. So in the very beginning of the series, he has a very deep animosity towards Picard, and the reason that is because in this battle, Picard was all Borged out, and he was kind of like the de facto leader of this battle, and he blames Picard in for the death of his wife, basically. So it starts off really heavy. They eventually meet and they kind of, settle things, and Picard explains, that wasn't really me. It was he was controlled by the Borg. It wasn't his personality, and I thought that was really interesting how the character development started off so sharply at the beginning of the series, and there's a lot, like, so much development that goes on. Cisco isn't, he moves up in rank during the show. So 3 seasons in is when he becomes the badass with the shaved head. That's when he becomes the captain of the Deep Space Nine, even though it's just a station. But his rank goes to captain. So there's a lot of character development with him about his morality and his moral stances on specific issues. Just all the characters in that show just have so much great character development. Worf has great development. There's a comic relief like Quark, has some pretty interesting development, as well as his relatives, and his son has some really cool development as well. And the relationship between Quark's son and Cisco's son is really interesting as well. Quark's son wants to be a Starfleet officer, and Cisco's son is like this really artistic guy that likes to write poetry and do really artistic things that his dad, I guess, he it's not expected, but he does eventually kind of support what he's doing. So and I also think, like, if Cisco and Picard got in a fight, Cisco would win. That's what I think.
That's kind of a no-brainer, though. I don't think that anybody's going to say, like, "Oh, dude, geriatric French dude, totally going to beat the shit out of Benjamin Sisko."
Well, it's not like Picard didn't get into any fist fights in the TNG. He definitely did.
Yeah, but he's also, and listen, if you're talking young Picard versus young Sisko, remember young Picard got stabbed in the heart. So
yeah, young Picard's kind of crazy.
Yeah. So, but if we're talking about, in the same timelines, yeah, I don't think anyone would doubt that Sisko would win. But yeah, listen, Deep Space Nine is a great series, but I think that's part of the thing is that certainly my experience growing up was of dipping in and out of these shows, which is probably why TNG was a more satisfying experience. But now that we can Netflix and binge, I bet that Deep Space Nine would be much more satisfying if I worked through it from the start.
Yeah, the funny thing is I actually hated Deep Space Nine as when it broadcast, because you had to anticipate and watch like every episode, and it was at the point where they would just play it late at night, and I'd watch it and I'd be like, I don't know really what's going on, but that's cool. But later on, when I had the opportunity to actually binge it from beginning to end, I was like, God damn, this thing's amazing. And I know you, Hunter, you like Dax's character, right? And she has like a really weird and interesting story on how the life of, I don't even know what they're called. What is her race, and how do they operate?
Trill.
Yeah, that's right. So they have a weird like lifespan, right?
Yeah, the Trill, it's a symbiote that lives inside of the host. And the wait, were the people, was her race a Trill, or was the actual symbiote a Trill?
I think her people are the Trill, and I don't know if they have a different name for the endosymbiont, or whether they just call it the endosymbiont. I can look that up right now.
Okay, because she was in that symbiote was in Dax is the actual symbiote, right? And Jadzia is the host. And so she was that, like, Dax was in a Klingon and a bunch of other people. Yeah, it was a really cool character. It was really awesome. And like how Cisco would always call her old man because he knew Dax as the Klingon, I believe, who was like an older man.
Yeah, and I thought it was pretty cool that the symbiote retains like the memories from past hosts, and that I thought it was also interesting because they do cross genders and how that works. I thought that was pretty interesting as well. And then when she dies and gets replaced, the weird relationship because her and Worf were an item. So she dies, and then there's like this weirdness when the new Dax comes around. But yes, but yeah, they had a bunch of great characters. Chief O'Brien. He was just like this nonchalant character in TNG, and then he has like a greater role. I thought Worf's role in DS9 was like much well done as far as developing him as a character. And then there are a couple characters that I really didn't get much or really didn't care for. I think Kira, never really connected with her. I always thought she was annoying for some reason.
Yeah, we
And then-
always loved Quark in this house. We started to say, hey, you want to watch some Quark instead of DS9? Because we just loved the character, and his bar was so central to all the interactions of the people. It was we really loved his character.
Yeah, Quark was awesome, and just anytime he went back to his home planet, like those were like just hilarious episodes. And then his brother, which looks like the dumbest dude ever, is like actually a genius. He's like the smartest guy on the station, but you wouldn't know it by the way he talks. And then there's kind of like the son. He goes on to actually be the first Ferengi in Starfleet, and there's a very traumatic experience that he has later on. That's really interesting. But yeah, that family, I think they are the comic relief of the show. And everything that they're in is just really funny. And Garrick, I just love the dude. He is so sneaky and awesome, and I know I love spy stuff. So Garrick is just an awesome character, very morally ambiguous. But if we're going to talk about a specific episode, I don't know. Do you guys want to talk about In the Pale Moonlight?
My knowledge is not that complete. You'll have to give a synopsis.
Okay. All right. So in the Pale Moonlight, the beginning of the episode starts with there's Cisco finds out that the Romulans enter a pact with the Dominion. It's a neutrality pact, so it doesn't say that the Romulans are going to actually join into the war, but they're going to remain neutral and allow the Dominion to pass through their space unencumbered. So at this point, the Federation is actually losing this war. They're using the Romulan space to invade a lot of the other colonies, and Cisco's kind of at his wit's end, and he sees that this agreement that they have is going to be the undoing of them. So in this, he's trying to come up with a plan. He's like, how can I persuade the Romulans to either break this agreement or fight against the Dominion? So he goes to thinking, and he goes fetching for ideas. And he's like, okay, maybe we can talk to the ambassador, or find some evidence that the Dominion wants to do harm to the Romulans. So unfortunately, he's not able to find this evidence. He talks to Garrick, which is, something. If you're going to talk to Garrick, he's going to have to do some type of shady solution. He talks to Garrick. He says, "You know what? We're gonna need some evidence." So first, he sends Garrick out. He comes up short. He's like, "Nope, I wasn't able to find anything, and two of my contacts that I did get in contact with were killed. So, I pulled all my favors, and I have no more options." But I know a guy who can do some great stuff with a holodeck and fabricate some evidence. Cisco, he chooses to go forward with that option. So he finds the guy to make the holodeck video, the fake one. They put it on like an official Cardassian data disk or something to make it look authentic. And then they signal the ambassador to have a meeting so that they can show him this evidence. They have the meeting. He shows them the evidence. A day later, he and Cisco and the ambassador meet, and the ambassador basically tells him this is a fake. At that point, Cisco realizes, we're pretty much doomed. We not only were caught faking evidence, now they can present this to the Dominion, and perhaps now they're going to join forces. Garrick, being a sneaky bastard, he actually plants a bomb on the ambassador's ship and blows it up. So Garrick assassinates this high-ranking Romulan ambassador. Cisco is furious. And all this whole time, Cisco had to bribe officials. The guy that was making the Romulan evidence had caused some trouble in Quark's bar, so he had to bribe Quark, amongst other things. So he's doing a lot of things that are not condoned by Starfleet in any sense. So he goes to Quark's shop and punches him in the face. He didn't want anybody to die because of this, but Garrick says, "You know what? This was necessary. This had to happen. And this was my plan all along." And Cisco figures, yes, it was, but the means in which he went about it was all wrong. But he had to do what he had to do to protect the station. Throughout this whole episode, it's him recounting the incident into a log. So he's telling his story, and at the very end, he erases the log. Of course, he can't have evidence of this, else he'll be reprimanded by Starfleet. So
I was going to say that the important thing about the log too is at the end he's basically saying, like, I've done all these things and I'm okay with it. I can deal with this. And then he's like, "Computer, erase that log."
Yeah, he does come to complete terms at what he had to do. Like, he couldn't be torn about it because he's in the middle of a war, and lives are depending on him. Yes, an ambassador was killed. The guy who made the fake holodeck transmission was also killed to preserve any of the plot leaking out. So, these were things that in the end, Cisco did come to terms, as those were actions he had to take in order to protect the station and Starfleet, even though they were morally kind of gray or reprehensible. And it kind of made me realize, is like, yeah, that stuff goes on today, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah, and sorry, Hunter. The other thing too was Garak. It was basically sort of like a, I forget what the exact line is, but it's the like, "Will nobody rid me of this troublesome priest" kind of thing. And then Garak was like, "You came to me because you knew I'd do, even without you telling me, I would do what had to be done, because you can't.
Yeah, exactly. So, Garrick, if he had to come to Garrick, it was going to be something shady anyway. So it's not like most of the stuff that he was doing would be normally not permitted by, Cisco in any means. But he knew because of the situation, he would have to distance himself a little bit and have Garrick handle it. But yeah, that's basically my favorite episode.
I think these are also good episodes to have talked to back, the Drumhead and then whatever this DS9 episode was, because a lot of what Star Trek The Next Generation is about is that we preserve our principles no matter what. And a lot of what DS9 is about is putting us in situations that force us to compromise our principles for survival or lives or anything like that.
Yeah, that's what I thought was interesting about Cisco is that, when I was thinking about him and Picard, like Picard always tried to take the moral high ground on any situation. Like I felt that he never relinquished that, even if, maybe it might have served him better in a way that, might have made it easier for his crew. But yeah, you do see that Cisco, does get a little gray in his morality at times.
Yeah, this reminds me of TNG, Tapestry, which in my opinion is the best episode where Picard goes back and is able to change, not being stabbed in the heart, which is what Hunter was talking about earlier. But yeah, I remember there's a part there. Q talks about like, well, look at how many people you've killed and what your decisions, like these are all the voices of the people that you've killed. And basically, I think Picard said something like, these are things that had to be done, and it's like there would have been deaths either way, something like this. So this maybe it sounds like there's a theme running between DS9 and TNG, like that there is these hard choices, hard decisions that could end up in people's lives. They covered in both.
Yeah, that's for sure. There's another episode too. Go ahead, Hunter.
Well, I was going to say, and part of the problem that Drumhead points up is that it's always that that logic of that war logic of there are hard choices that have to be made, and people who are interested in grabbing power by any means, fundamentalists, people interested in a witch hunt, always fire up that logic of we're under threat, therefore we must compromise our principles. So that's kind of the difficult thing, is it also requires a really accurate threat assessment to see whether is there a real threat or is somebody deliberately trying to create an imagined threat to justify grabbing power, like Hitler burning down the Reichstag so that he can make himself Führer.
All right. Yeah, another episode I want to talk about. Is anyone familiar with It's Only Paper Moon episode? No takers. If I would do a synopsis, it's about, well, it is mainly about, there is a battle previously. It's called, I think it's the Battle of AR 558 or something. And one of the characters is that it's focused on is Nog, which is the son of Quark. No, not the son of Quark. It's Quark's nephew and Rom's son. And during that battle, Nog actually loses his leg. He does have a traumatic injury during that battle. So what happens is he's definitely not in a good headspace. So he goes to see Dax for counseling. And this is Jadzia Dax, I think, that he goes to. Maybe, I'm not sure. One of the Daxes. And this is because he's completely traumatized by the whole incident. He becomes unresponsive to his family and friends. He also goes into the holodeck a lot, and the holodeck kind of becomes his new world for a while because he's just completely detached from reality because of the traumatic experience that he's had. In the holodeck, there's actually a personality in there that shows up in quite a few episodes named Vic Fontaine. He's like a lounge singer. This holodeck simulation is basically a bar, I guess. It's like a Las Vegas bar, like maybe in the 50s or something like that, kind of, Sinatra era bar. And he gets a lot of advice from this holodeck personality during that whole episode. His other friends are, of course, alarmed about his kind of addiction to the holodeck at this point. So there's a point in which his best friend Jake, which is the son of Cisco, they go into the holodeck to see a performance from this Vic Fontaine. Nog is also along in this excursion. And, everybody is looking up to Nog as a hero. They're trying to celebrate with him about how he overcame this battle and, he saved some lives. But during this occasion, Nog becomes very angry and condescending to Jake's date, which he brings along. And when Jake asks him what's wrong, he becomes like super angry. He starts a fight in the holodeck. He's throwing tables into Jake, and Vic takes him back to the back room. So they have a conversation, and eventually, Nog kind of breaks down. He's not able to contain the emotions that he was kind of trying to hide from everybody. Everybody sees him as a hero, and he couldn't express what he really felt like on the outside. Later on, Nog is continuing his holodeck addiction, but Chief O'Brien sees that somebody tampered with the holodeck, and it's weird because this character of Vic Fontaine becomes self-aware. It's kind of strange because there's kind of a longer story to this, but what happens is, Nog wants to summon him, but apparently because Vic becomes self-aware, it's up to him whether he wants to appear in front of Nog. And he eventually comes before Nog and he talks to them, and they talk about the war, about how it was to be an officer and soldier. He talks about everything that happened on the planet. And then, he gets a therapeutic moment. And then he goes, finally, all the cards on the table, he gets his feelings out. And then finally his addiction is broken. And Nog finally understands that it's time to leave the holosuite and the whole world that he was addicted to, which would be, Vic's lounge. So he goes back to his family. He goes to his mom and dad and Quark. He promises them all that he's okay. But soon after, in a Starfleet uniform, he visits Vic once again, lets him know, okay, you know what, I'm doing better. I'm returning back to Starfleet duty, because he had kind of gone AWOL for this whole time. And he thanks Vic for his help. And then his uncle Quark, he's like, you know what? If you need any help with anything, I got Vic running 24/7, and you can visit him at any time. So I know I probably poorly explained the episode, but I thought it was a really interesting look into PTSD, which I really didn't see that as an emphasis ever in the show. And it made sense here for Deep Space Nine because it's half the show is just war and people fighting. So I thought I was glad that they kind of addressed that specifically and shown like what is the dark side of war and the outcomes when you are shown as a hero, but in the inside, you have this traumatic experience that you can't get over.
Well, and that, I mean, so much of Star Trek is about diplomacy at all costs. So it's so much about avoiding war that it's only really in Deep Space Nine that starts to get explored.
Yes, that's for sure.
Sounds like I'd really like Deep Space Nine because I haven't seen it, but it sounds like I would really like it.
It's the best, man.
Fuck you, Dusty. I mean, we're supposed to be talking about Star Trek, not like
Star Trek too.
Like, all right, Cisco is so badass that he helped design a ship that has cloaking device. It has better weapons than your normal Starfleet ship. It's small, peppy, and it gets the job done. And it's the only ship in the that's specifically made for war. It is a warship, and it's called the Defiant. And he helped design it.
And Picard can play a flute, so like, you know.
War's way more exciting than playing the flute.
Wait, a warship in Starfleet? That doesn't sound very Starfleet.
No, that's the Defiant. That's the one war. They make a point about this. It's the only Starfleet warship.
Yes, and Worf sleeps in it.
Huh. Yeah, I'll have to check it out. I mean, when I was a kid and stuff like this, of course, as a kid, I didn't understand what was going on. But also, as you guys were saying, it was out of series, so now with Netflix and everything like this, you can just watch the whole thing. And so I guess I'll have to do it, but I've heard DS9 described as like a space opera, and that wasn't that attractive to me. So I'm just like, okay, I'll go for the ultra, ultra diplomatic, way of TNG. And yeah, I really like it. I don't know. I like the diplomacy way of looking at things. Even if my ex-girlfriend said like, I don't like this show. They never smile.
Yeah, which show did it? In TNG?
Yeah, in TNG.
Yeah, the first episode that I watched recently, the first thing that I noticed is that everyone is a rational robot.
Well, and when I remember Picard was living his pseudo life, he did a lot of smiling towards the end of that. But yeah, there's not a whole lot of smiles in TNG.
He seems like more emotional than the other characters, which I like.
Who does?
Yeah,
Picard?
Picard? Yeah. Picard he definitely gets emotional. But I think he's just also a better actor than most of the other people on the show. I mean, can we talk about Wesley Crusher? Like in general, the Star Trek, because as you were talking about DS9, Dusty, the thing I started thinking about is like Jake Sisko also kind of sucks. Like Star Trek does not do a good job with kids.
Yeah, but Nog doesn't suck.
And
he
I also
acts
had
like a
that.
private.
Nog is the best child character probably in the Star Trek universe.
Yeah, probably the only good one. Period.
So wait, what was wrong with Wesley Crusher? I mean, I don't know. I didn't mind him. I thought he was kind of cool, like, prodigy guy and all this kind of stuff.
Those are all the things that were wrong with him.
Yeah, and he had that stupid rainbow uniform. Like, that was the worst part. Like, everybody else has apparently like an ensign, you have to dress like a fucking unicorn. Yeah. Anyway, yeah, I would say in general the kids sucked on those shows, and then there were certain other like, the cast changes were always for the worse. Like when they replaced Beverly Crusher with whatever that other doctor was, she was worse, and then Jadzia Dax. They replaced her with Esri Dax, who was worse. So any cast changes always seem to be downhill.
Well, they went from Yar to Worf.
Oh, that was okay. That was an improvement. I'll give you that. There goes my theory.
Yeah. Well, I think we've done a pretty good job. Did you want anything else to say about DS9, Sean?
No, I think we covered basically everything. I mean, the good parts, the bad parts. I mean, I just really think it was the best series. It was really good, really well done show.
Yeah, it's one of those series like you get finished with one episode and you immediately just want to watch the next one. That's how I felt when watching it.
Yeah,
And there's
I
all-
would say that it introduced me to the dude who played Wei-Un, I think.
Oh yeah, Wei Yun. That's an interesting character.
He was like the main emissary from like the Dominion, and he also played Shran in Enterprise. And both of those characters were pretty awesome, and that guy's a good actor. I really liked him.
Yeah, Wei Yun was a really good antagonist. And I love that whole thing where he dies and then they send another clone out. And in the end it seems like he kind of finally gets tired of dying.
Yeah, I would also say we've talked about DS9 without talking about the Dominion, and also we've talked about DS9 without talking about the whole Bajoran Kardashian thing.
Yeah, there's so much going on in that show, huh?
Well, the Bajoran Cardassian thing is, to me, I mean, it's so much of it is just obviously a reference to Israel and Palestine. And yeah, I mean, the Kardashians basically are this expansionist empire, and then they sort of succeed in dominating the Bajorans, who are this strong, independent culture.
The Kardashians?
The Kardashians. I'm not quite sure who the Bajorans are in the Kardashian analogy. I mean, what is it? I don't even know. Anyway, but the Cardassians succeeded in dominating the Bajorans, and the Bajorans are this strong, independent culture that won't die and basically fight this massive terrorist resistance movement.
Yeah, the Jem'Hadar are interesting too, right? So they're like this very fast-growing genetically race, but they're completely manipulated by the founders through a drug, right? That milky white substance.
White is what it's called.
This
Yeah.
white.
Speaking of the founders, Odo was pretty cool too.
Yeah, that was interesting how he found his planet, which was just like this ocean of his people, and how he can just meld with them. But yeah, Odo was interesting that he didn't want to carry a gun. Like, he's like, I don't need a gun to do my job, and he was basically like the chief security officer of the station. And he lived in a little box.
Yeah, and I think what's also interesting is that Odo's species, the changelings, faced persecution themselves, and then basically got fed up at being persecuted and became the persecutors, pulling the strings from behind the scenes. And I mean, that's another one of those recurring themes and patterns is oppressed becoming oppressor, which I think is, pretty interesting and also timely in terms of Israel and Palestine.
All right, did you want to start in on Voyager?
I think Isaiah should lead us into that. What were you going to say, Sean?
I was just going to say I need to roll out, but I just want to end with a controversial opinion and say that I liked Enterprise, the series. I thought it was pretty good.
I didn't finish Enterprise.
Except for the theme music. I couldn't. It almost broke me several times watching that series. It was terrible theme music, but I generally liked that series. It's better than most people give it.
Mm, I don't know. I didn't like some of the characters, but like I said, I didn't finish it. And I think, like you said, the character that came back, or the actor that came back that played right, Wei Yun, did a really stellar job.
Yeah, Enterprise seemed really campy to me. I mean, I love Scott Bakula, but it seemed a little bit of a little too campy for me.
Maybe, yeah, I could see that. All right, Isaiah, did you want to talk about Voyager a little bit?
Is Isaiah there? I think maybe not. So I'll lead off on Voyager. Yeah, so part of what they clearly figured out with Star Trek is, Star Trek all takes place in the Alpha Quadrant, and then they figured out, hey, there are all these other quadrants. So in Deep Space Nine, there's the wormhole that takes them to the Gamma Quadrant, and then what happens in Voyager is that they accidentally get sucked to the Delta Quadrant because this alien entity is trying to find something to the alien entity called the Caretaker is trying to find something that will help out this planet that is struggling that he cares for, and he's just sort of randomly pulling ships from all over the galaxy. And so basically in the pilot episode, they have to make a choice between making it back to the Alpha Quadrant and trying to help this species that's under threat. And they decide to help this species that's under threat, even though it means they're going to be stranded in the Alpha Quadrant, in the Delta Quadrant, something like 80 light years from 80 years of warp travel from home or something like that, so that by the time they got back, they'd all be geriatric and their families would be dead. And then the whole series is them trying to figure out how to get home. And they sometimes they figure out how to shave 10 years off their travel time, but they encounter all sorts of species. Like they have a lot of encounters with the Borg. And one of the interesting things is they basically rescue this Borg known as Seven of Nine, played by Jerry Ryan, and that gives them an excuse to have somebody walking around in a cat suit for the entirety of it, which is really...
Are you talking about Seven of Nine or Tig of Biddies?
Tig of Biddies? What's Tig of Biddies? Is that some fan fiction thing about how big her titties are?
I don't know. I just made it up.
Oh. Anyway, yeah, so Tig of Biddies. And yeah, which was, a brilliant Hollywood TV choice. But yeah, actually, 709's character is one of the most interesting characters in Star Trek, as Isaiah said, because, you basically get to watch her detribalized from the Borg, because she was abducted as a very young child. So she never really formed a human identity. And even though she is biologically human, she has to learn human culture and human cultural norms. So that's that. And then they also, I think the other really, really interesting part of Voyager is they encounter species 8572 or something like that, which is some species from fluidic space. So it's this species that lives in some sort of alternate dimension, and is the only species that can really fuck the Borg up.
Hey, could I ask you guys all a question about Voyager in general? Would you all say that you like it more or less than TNG?
I rank it third out of the group of TNG, DS9, and Voyager.
I would agree.
Like, it's cool to
Okay.
watch. There's a lot of, cool Borg stuff with 709, but the characters are so funky. Like Tuvok,
Funky
I
is
just called him
thing.
Tuvok. I just called him Tuvok Shakur. Like he was like, I don't know. It's kind of weird. How are you going to put a Vulcan in a security position? I don't know. It was just weird. But and Chakotay was weird. Like and super. Like the funny thing about Chakotay, all of his episodes were like super predictable because what happens is they send Chakotay off to an unexplored planet where he gets stuck for a while, and he meets a culture, and he shares They share culture with each other. Like it happens like at least once or twice a season. So I don't know. It was a weird series. And then Janeway, I thought coming off of DS9 and like how Cisco would act under pressure. I thought that Janeway didn't act very well or make very good decisions under pressure, like the way that Picard or Cisco did. I just thought, you know what, Cisco would have done this already. You know, it was such, it was just weird. But there were some interesting episodes though.
It's to me, it's the Captain Planet Star Trek series. They're really, I mean, it is very social justicey. It's like we're gonna have a female captain and we're gonna have a Native American, whatever vice captain, but first officer. But the difference is that like in TNG and in Deep Space Nine especially, and then to some extent even in the original series, they just have these people there. And they're not commenting on it, or it doesn't feel like they're trying to highlight it or underscore it. It's just such an effortless that they are presences in the show. Like, it's just like, oh, yeah, why is Cisco captain of DS9? Because he's fucking badass, and he's the best man for the job. So I would say that, you know, it's a little bit affirmative action-y rather than just like raw meritocracy.
If it's affirmative action-y, I think I'll skip it.
There's probably some notable episodes you can take a look at, like Scorpion, I would suggest, which is when they first meet Seven of Nine. I would say skip any episodes that have the phage in it, because I just hate the phage and it grosses me the hell out. Zombies.
Are they just poorly done zombies?
No, have you ever seen Escape from LA, the sequel to Escape from New York?
I don't think I've seen it, but I'm aware of it.
Yeah, well, they basically took the shittiest idea from that movie and decided to make it into a whole episode arc. So in Escape from LA, they basically, you know, they have all the neighborhoods of LA, but now they've turned dystopian. So in Beverly Hills, there's basically all these people who are constantly doing massive amounts of plastic surgery and kidnapping and killing people and taking their parts and incorporating them into themselves to survive. And the phage is literally, it's literally that.
They're like addicted to plastic surgery.
Yeah, basically they got infected with some disease and they can't fight it off. And so the only way they can keep themselves alive is to go around and harvest people for their organs. Again, like, it's a series of very, I mean, you know, sort of Captain Planet-y 90s obsessions.
Well, there's even an episode of Voyager where they go on the Earth into the 90s, and then Tuvok has like his multicolored like 90s outfit and everything. So it's definitely like a show that's a product of the 90s.
Okay.
But I thought there was an interesting thing. I don't remember if this was. I'm trying to think if this was an episode of Voyager. I know it's a Star Trek episode, but I'm thinking it's Voyager. But there was this one point, I think the captain gets incapacitated. This is just I don't know if it's Voyager, but I'll just explain the situation. I think it is. But the captain gets capacitated, and somehow a Vulcan has to run the show. And it shows that like someone who only runs on logic doesn't have the EQ to deal with people. It's just like, yeah, it's to me, it's like, what if Sam Harris became a captain of a ship, basically?
All my decisions are rational.
Yeah, exactly. But like, I can't remember if it's Tuvok that becomes like temporary captain or something like that. But whoever it is, a Vulcan becomes captain. They make a bunch of decisions. This might just be one of the newer movies. I don't know, but it shows how a lack of EQ can affect the crew in a way that logic doesn't really account for.
Well, and also,
sorry, go ahead.
Well, it also demonstrates what the point of the EQ is, right? Which is to have enough emotional and social intelligence to get the team working together effectively. Because it doesn't really matter if you're a smart individual on a starship. If you don't have everybody doing their job, then you're all fucked.
The weird thing about like the Vulcan that was in charge, like I'd say I can't really remember which series it was in, because he believes that he got to the most rational of places, that his orders had to be carried out because they were the most logical, and that also created an authoritarian environment within the ship. Because it's great to have someone like a Vulcan as an advisor, as a secondary advisor. Like a Vulcan can always give you your chances of success, but it's very difficult to make decisions based on that with the entire crew's morale in mind.
Yeah, and you mentioned the newer movies, Dusty, and in terms of that, it seems like that's a common theme in the newer movies, how Kirk and Spock play off each other, and one's like really logical in his decisions and Kirk is more spontaneous, and they kind of like balance each other out a little bit.
Well, that was always the best thing about the original series, was the the Kirk, Spock, Bones dynamic, because and I think Kate Fogarty wrote about this in the Dunbar Number Knowledge Bomb. Like, Spock was super rational. Bones was like a fucking petulant teenager. Like, he was just so emotional all the time. But, sort of really brought home the medical ethics, the human implications, the humanity. And then Kirk had the ability to listen to both sides and then process that and then synthesize together a better solution, which it was very clear why Kirk was the captain.
Yeah, very clear. And I have a question for Hunter, because I thought Neelix was okay. Why do you hate Neelix so much?
I mean, he was okay. It was just, he was a little bit quirky, a little bit camp, and, yeah, just...
There's an interesting episode, though, that involves him, where he kind of dies on an operating table for a while and comes back. And he realizes that there's no afterlife. And he gets very depressed about it. I don't know if you remember this episode or not. I forgot what it was called.
Yeah, I don't remember it. But I just didn't love Neelix in general. There were some things that were interesting, but he felt a little bit aggressively quirky. And I was
he's always working on some weird animal in his lab, right?
No, he was the cook mostly.
Oh, is like, yeah, but when he would cook like some weird ass stuff, like
he would always, he would cook weird ass stuff, and was trying to infuse he was like a fusion cook, again, most 90s thing ever.
But he always kept pets, didn't he? I remember him keeping pets. You know what? I think I'm confusing that with Enterprise.
Yeah, you
that's
may
what
be.
I'm doing.
My childhood was so lame.
A lack of Star Trek is a serious problem.
If you had to pick a favorite character from Voyager, who would yours be?
7 of 9. Or the Doc. I really liked the holographic Doc.
Yep, the Doctor is my favorite character.
I love how you say that like it means I guess correctly.
Yes, you did. How can nobody can not like the Doc?
Yeah, the Doc was great.
He's hilarious. He's always singing opera.
Well, peer-reviewed scientific studies have told us this.
Bro science, dude. Bro science. No, but I think the other good thing about the Doc is that a lot like Data, his struggles and his desires were so clear. Just as Data really wanted emotional life and he wanted those experiences, the Doc just wanted the freedom to move. And that was really his dream and everything he was trying to achieve.
Yeah, he had the emotions of Data, but he didn't. He had human emotions, but he was completely restricted to the ship. And there were like a lot of interesting and funny episodes revolving around him. Like he was the comedic relief for the show, and all the episodes that focused on him, I tended to enjoy a lot. And then there was, and it's funny how a lot of the shows did have crossovers, because in DS9, they had the actual Doc that they based the hologram on. So, and I believe that TNG and DS9 had some concurrent running, and so did Voyager and DS9. So DS9 was kind of like this middle piece that had tethers to both shows, which I thought was pretty cool.
Oh, that's really interesting. Could you elaborate on that more?
Yeah, so the way DS9 opens, it opens, with Picard and Sisko. And what happens is the reason that they are linked is because of that battle that was fought when he was turned into a Borg commander. There's also characters that came from TNG that became more prominent in DS9. So there was Miles O'Brien, who was the operator for the teleporter. He became basically the handyman on DS9, or the engineer. And then there was Worf, who came onto DS9, and he had a very large role in that show. Worf, they really got into okay, Klingons are actually badass, because they basically put him through a fighting tournament, and he beats like a bunch of Jem'Hadar asses in a row without rest. And it shows, wow, these Klingons are really tough, and they're really strong guys who are really persevere through hardship when it comes to battle. I'm trying to think, the connection between Voyager is through the Doctor, because during DS9, Bashir, who is the Doctor on DS9, who is like a genetically modified human that he finds out later in the series. Well, anyway, he helps out with the holographic program that's going to be for ship use. So the Doctor in Voyager is a hologram who performs medical, things. So the actual Doctor, who the hologram is based off of, him and Bashir meet up and they discuss about the program. So That's where the connection between Voyager and Deep Space Nine is. It's a little less in Voyager and Deep Space Nine, but there is that little bit of a connection. I might be missing some other connections as well, but that's the one that I remember since the Doctor is my favorite character.
Yeah, and this also gets to part of what's going on in Hollywood, which is all of that is really a prelude to the whole universe building stuff that Hollywood is really focused on now with Marvel and DC and Star Wars and all of that. Because ultimately they understand that the richer the universe and the more interconnected it is, the more you can get butts and seats.
And like Deadpool says, hopefully they'll be young enough to carry the franchise for 10 or 12 years.
Yeah, I think that's a big deal now. Because if you think about it, like TV shows aren't like how they used to be. Like if you think about TNG, for instance, it's just you can pop on any episode in any order. It doesn't matter. It makes complete sense from beginning to end. A lot of the TV shows that people love today are not in that format. People are wanting to get really engaged into these long, drawn-out stories that have, really big payoffs at the end of the season. Every episode ends with a cliffhanger of some sort. So these small little self-contained stories that a lot of us were used to growing up in the 80s, like all the sitcoms, any other show, like most 80s shows did not have this kind of long story that they were telling. There were a couple, but what was it, Dallas? People love that show. When I was a kid, I didn't care about that show. It just seemed like a whole lot of boring to me. But
it
there
seems
were
like
like
most 90s shows were like that too.
Yeah, and it's because of technology. The point is that if you have a fixed time slot and there's no guarantee that people are going to track all the installments, then you have to make it so that they are standalone episodes. And you still see that on TV with things like NCIS or,
most
special
sitcoms, right?
unit. Sitcoms, they're all designed to be standalone with then enough of a through line that the regular fans have something to track that develops across the course of the show.
Yeah, and that's how TV has to develop. And that's just, I would assume it would be a nightmare for anyone who wanted to start watching Lost when it was on air.
Don't start in the middle of that.
Yeah, it pretty much makes zero sense to you. Because I remember there was a lot of talk about Lost, like so much talk about it. And all the talk that I heard, I was like, there's no way I can start watching this show. It's too complex to just kind of jump into it. And around that time, I think I just had gotten Netflix probably a couple years later. And I said, oh, there's Lost on here. Maybe I can, I'll get into it late, but, at least I know what's going on. And the only answer before that was having like a TiVo or a DVR. That was the only other way you can really sit down and watch these stories that aren't told in a single episode. But yeah, it is definitely a sign of the times and the access of technology that we have that allows these types of stories. And I guess at the time, if you think about DS9, they were taking a very bold move by formatting the show in that specific way. And I know there's a lot of people that really don't like DS9 because of that.
Because it's the story, the episodes are more in sequence.
Yeah, DS9 is a little bit more difficult to just like pick up an episode and watch it and understand like the context of what's going on in the episode. There's so much stuff that goes on and story-wise that builds up certain things. So if you're just jumping around, like in the beginning, in the first couple seasons, you could do that, just pick up any random episode. But after like season 3, they really start to emphasize the longer story and plot of the overall seasons and things like that.
Interesting.
But yeah, but it's funny because I kind of agree a little bit because when it first came on TV, I didn't understand what the hell was going on in Deep Space Nine. So, and at that time, when I didn't really have access to technology like we do today, I actually preferred TNG over DS9. It was only after that I watched it in a format in which I can just like binge through episodes or watch the episodes in sequence anytime I want it that I actually thought that DS9 was a superior series. But it's because I didn't have the context when I originally watched it that made me kind of dismiss it as I don't know what the hell's going on. Like this seems boring because I don't, this show just doesn't make sense to me.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing is that Star Trek is better standalone, and DS9 is better as a binge watch.
Yeah, and there were a lot of cartoons too. The Saturday morning cartoons also had that same deal where it didn't matter. You could watch any episode whatsoever, and you'd be fine. And then the show that was on Robotech would come on. I was like, oh my God, this show is so boring. I don't get what the hell is going on in this show. And it was like a Japanese animated show. And then later in life, like when I was a teen, I went and picked up a box set because everybody was like, oh my God, Robotech was so awesome. I was like, really? I thought it was boring as hell. So I picked up the show and I was like, oh wow, this is an amazing show. And I realized it was amazing because you had to watch all of these episodes in sequence. So I kind of had the same realization with that show as I did with DS9. And I was like, wow, I couldn't believe they were showing this and that I didn't get into this as a kid. But then again, I kind of realized that, yeah, I guess if you're not watching these things in sequence, then it really doesn't have the same effect as just kind of picking any random episode and just watching it. I can imagine, imagine trying to watch, pick a random Lost episode and just watch that and be like, what the hell am I watching? Like, this doesn't make any
you
sense
would be
at all.
Lost.
What's that?
I said you would be lost.
Yeah, exactly. So, that's just how where media is headed. I don't see that the TV space is going to die off anytime soon, at least not completely. But like a lot of the new shows are really set up for binge watching them.
Yeah, but it also, I think, depends on, again, use case as well. Because it's not like, I don't know what the ratings are for CSI or NCIS or any of those shows, but I think those shows do pretty damn well.
Yeah, they do.
And I think that it's partly because, when people have had, or, even the most generic sitcoms, and it's because when people come home from a long day, they don't want to track a whole bunch of complex storylines and have to remember, wait, what happened? Who is this character? Da, da, da. They want something that's single serving.
Yeah, typically nerdy people are really into their shows in that manner. All the juicy details of a storyline. And it's funny because there are soap operas that have been going on for 20 years. As well, so that format has been around. But
my parents watched this British one called Coronation Street that's been around since the 60s.
Oh wow.
Well, yeah,
I think my mom watched one of those. I don't remember if I think it's Days of Our Lives or something like that. Oh, got a phone call.
In general, yeah, the British soap operas are super long running like that, like Coronation Street, EastEnders, Brookside. Yeah, and they, As the World Turns, started in 1956 but ended in 2009. but Coronation Street is the longest running because it started in 1960.
All right.
Whoa.
Give me 1 second. I just have to.
Yeah. All right, guys. Well, I think this is fantastic. I don't know if you guys are going to keep going, but I think I have shared all my thoughts on Star Trek, which is exciting.
Yeah, me too. I think I'm going to get going. My knowledge is tapped out.
But you know,
My
I mean,
knowledge was tapped out a long time ago.
but Dusty, I think you've made a strong case for why DS9 might be worth a binge watch. So
You've almost convinced me. Yeah.
I agree.
yeah, it's impressive. Anyway, guys, thank you so much, and you know, have a great day, and I'll talk to you guys soon.
Happy birthday, Hunter.
Thanks. See ya.
Thanks, guys.
See you guys.
All right. Yeah, sorry about that. Had a phone call.
No, it's
We're
okay.
wrapping things up. So, did you want to do your plugs?
Sure, yeah. Anyone who wants to can check out my podcast, Mindgasms Andrew Meintzer, but you can just find it by searching Mindgasms on YouTube and talk to lots of mixed mental artists and other fascinating people. And there's my blog too, which is at mindgasms.theblogpress.com. And I also have a Patreon page, and I'm on the Twitter and the Facebooky boo-ha at Andrew Meintzer. My last name is spelled Meintzer. It's a weird German spelling. And yeah, that's it.
All right, great. Well, we're going to talk about next week communism. This is a
Oh,
top.
cool.
I'm not an
You get
expert.
Jordan Peterson on here.
Yeah, maybe. Who knows? But Isaiah prompted the topic. Communism is what we're going to talk about next week. Also, if you want to make everything great again for the mixed mental arts community, go ahead and like and subscribe to our content. Also, good night. We have an affiliate link on our Mixed Mental Arts website. So check out our affiliate link if you'd like to shop on Amazon. Bookmark the link, and whenever you make some purchases, please click on that link and help us out a little bit. All right. You can also check us out on the social medias. Twitter at Mixed Mental Arts, Instagram Mixed Mental Arts, Facebook Mixed Mental Arts. We have a Facebook group that's really active. Come troll us, talk shit, have some great conversations, anything. But we do have a great group of people. If you want to look at my personal stuff, I have a YouTube video page, but hopefully I'll get some new stuff on there soon. But if you want to check it out, it's Black Rednecks, White Liberals content, just some breakdowns of some of the chapters in the book. My Twitter is at Woke Centrist.
And you
All
also
right.
use your woke magic on your YouTube channel.
Yeah, if you'd like to see some woke magic, check out my videos. And announcing in 2 weeks, next Saturday after the communism chat, we will be talking about Black Rednecks, White Liberals. So I hope you guys join us for the next 2 chats or for all of them, and have a great evening.